everyone. My name is Lisa Black, and I am one of the Rogue Women Writers. We are a group of 6 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from intelligence officer to journalism to psychotherapists to White House strategists. To let you know how this is going to go, for our participants in the Zoom room, you will be in the gallery during the reading. We encourage you to introduce yourself by typing your name and any contact information into the chat bar. For those of you joining us on Facebook Live, please comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors, and especially if you have a question to ask. The comments will be monitored and relayed to the authors in real time, and the authors will be talking about themselves, their books, and reading only briefly so that we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. All of the books discussed here tonight should be available through your local bookstore. Let's all use the hashtags #RogueReads and #RogueWomenWriters as we post about our experiences with these authors and their works. As I said, my name is Lisa Black, and I'm the author of 14 novels featuring forensic specialists, which happens to be my day job. I am based here in Florida, working with my local police department, and I am so thrilled to be emceeing this event. So without further ado, let me introduce you to these amazingly talented authors. First up, we're going to talk to cardiologist Dr. Doug Lyle in California, has produced 22 award-winning books of fiction and nonfiction, blogs, and a podcast, and served as consultant for countless novelists and film writers, including me, despite the fact I once introduced him at Thriller Fest as Noah Wiley. In prior bad acts, ex-military experts Bobby Kane and Harper McCoy go on a rescue mission to rescue a doctor kidnapped to treat a gut-shot criminal in the hills of Tennessee. And when Dr. Lyle relaxes after writing, he likes to pair popcorn with bourbon on the rocks, usually Maker's Mark or a Blanton's. So tell us about yourself and your book.
Hey, thanks for having me. Kind of like somebody said earlier, I don't get invited many places and never more than once. I think it was Allison that said that. But this is my 4th or 5th series. I forget which. But this is Bobby Kane and Harper McCoy. The series that this is the 2nd book in the series. The first was called Skin in the Game. I write the Jake Longley thrillers, but they're more comedic. These are not comedic. There's nothing comedic about them. They're down and dirty thrillers. And the reason I call it Kane and Harper is because in the South, guys are known by their last name and girls are known by their first name. And that's kind of the way it's always been for like 100 years, I think. Even my grandparents did that. Kane and Harper are non-biological brother and sister who were raised by a gypsy family. After Kane was abandoned and scooped up by the family, and Harper was purchased from her half Cherokee alcoholic mother for $200 and a couple of bottles of whiskey. And the family of 60 people basically raised them, but they trained them in all kinds of scams. I mean, pickpocketing, second story work, any kind of scam you could come up with, but they also put on shows to make money. And these are real. I mean, this gypsy families moved around the South. I remember seeing them when I was a tiny kid in horse-drawn carriages. And then later they went to mobile homes and pickup trucks, but they're still roaming around doing stuff. And they do odd jobs, but they also put on shows. Well, Bobby showed a propensity with knives. He could throw knives. He was very good at them from a very early age. And by 7, he was known as Bobby Blade, and he was the center of the show. Anyway, the family finally got busted up when he was 12 and Harper was 13, and they got sent away, and they ended up getting adopted by families, and they didn't see each other for 15 years. Bobby went into the Army, attracted the attention of Langley because of his special skills to be able to get in and out of places quietly from his training to kill people with a knife, and he became an exterminator basically for the military throughout the Middle East. Harper went to the Navy, ended up in intelligence, ended up in the CIA. They attracted her and hired her, and she was running a black ops, and they brought Bobby in at the last minute, and they run into each other in Afghanistan and do something off the books there. And so the brother and sister were reunited. That's kind of the gist of who these characters are. So what I'll do is I'll just read a very short bit from this, the first chapter of Prior Bad Acts, which is the 2nd book in the series. Bobby Kane stood at the wall of windows in the St. Germain penthouse condo he shared with his sister, Harper McCoy, near 2 a.m. He enveloped a firm rubber ball in each fist, squeezing them in a to and fro rhythm, right, left, right, left. The action made little inroad into the tension that gripped his shoulders, but at least it was adding to his hand strength. The key, according to Uncle Mo. Whether climbing a tree, pulling off a second-story B&E, or attempting to survive a mano-a-mano fight to the death, grip strength often offered the make-or-break advantage. Rain streaked the glass and muted his view over the Sobro area and the lights from Broadway a block away. Lower Broadway, the Bourbon Street of Nashville, rich with food, drink, and country music, was winding down. Lights winking off, drunks staggering home, musicians packing up, another gig finished. The city stumbled toward slumber. Not so for Kane. The fourth night in a row, fitful sleep had dragged him from bed to stand in this very spot. Not an uncommon occurrence. His dreams came off and on in no predictable pattern. Lately, more on. Even during his restful nights, they appeared as not so gentle nips along the edge of his dreamscape, coiled to flare up full blown. When they did, sleep became impossible. Bad night? Harper moved to stand next to him. Yeah. Which one? She meant which dream. Kane possessed a catalog to choose from. Not that the choice was his, never his. Sometimes it was the traitorous Iraqi commander whose throat he had sliced just so. Dark room, third floor, dead of night. Never saw his face, but felt the warmth of his departing life ooze over his hands. Other times it was the Al-Qaeda bomb maker who earned Kane's blade up through his diaphragm and into his heart for dispatching 3 Marines with his roadside devices, or one of the other 24 sanctioned missions he had completed. Sometimes an unsanctioned mission reared up, like the 3 Mexicans, the ones who had killed his parents in Tyler and fled, thinking the border and the cartel that they worked for would protect them. He and Harper tracked the trio to Juarez, dead of night, in and out, no shadow of their visit left behind, only the 3 corpses. Tonight, the Taliban scumbag who stood sentry while a pair of his compadres raped a young woman, her screams and cries still jangling in his head. Kane and the other assigned operatives, SEALs, Marines, and Harper as the CIA controller, had completed their mission, the silent elimination of an enemy asset, and were hunkered down in the basement waiting to hump it to the desert extraction site. But the sounds of the girl's misery and fear had frayed his nerves to the point that sitting by was no longer an option. Harper had been there, the night of their reunion after a 15-year separation, and had helped, without hesitation. Their actions were unsanctioned, no permission granted or sought. Risky move. Could have crashed both their careers. Turned out, that was a moot concern. Harper caught the sentry's attention. Kane overpowered and bled him through a deft puncture of his femoral artery, clutching him tightly, hand over his mouth, feeling his struggles wane as his vital energy faded. He and Harper then introduced the 2 rapists to their virgins. The girl scurried to freedom, if there was such a thing in that desert hellhole. You were there, Kane said. No other words were needed. Harper nodded. Want some tea? She asked. Couldn't hurt. They sat at the kitchen table. Kane placed the stress balls on the surface, settling them against the metal napkin holder. He cradled the warm cup, took a sip. The chamomile infused his nerves, softening the invading images. We need a job, Harper said. He looked at her over his cup. Idleness makes you fret, Harper continued. Drags up your demons. That was true. They had had a month to unwind from their last job. Kane could do a week, even 2, but a month? Too much downtime allowed the past to dig in its claws, pull him from bed to the window where he watched the sleeping city and fought internal battles. It wasn't guilt. He never allowed that to enter the equation. Each of his sanctioned missions had been righteous, on point, a problem that he could best resolve, even if they were off the books, way off. No written orders, no records. It's the way it had to be. And the others? The ones since he and Harper had left military service behind, the 3 who had killed his parents? Never guilt over that one. No, it wasn't guilt. It was simply images, a series of pictograms, movies no one should have to store in their memory banks. His were filled with such. You're right, Kane said. He stood. You want some more? I'm good. He refilled his cup. His cell chimed from the living room coffee table where he had left it. Caller ID read Milner. Well, they wanted a job. So that's the end of chapter 1.
Cool. Very, very cool.
Thanks. Hopefully it's a brief introduction to these characters for readers who didn't read the first book, and they kind of get a feel for who they are. Other parts are sprinkled through the book to kind of fill in some of those gaps, but I try not to go back and completely rewrite the history.
Right. That's always difficult.
You offer little bits and pieces here and there. Exactly. How much is too much? Exactly.
It's always difficult with a series.
Yep. And then try not to change them too much.
Right.
So, Doug, you have a reputation for humor, and that was all pretty serious.
Yep.
Is that the tone of the whole book? Or
Oh, yeah. This whole series is much, like I said, they're darker. They're more true thrillers. They're in your face. Whereas the Longley series are a lot of happenstance and serendipity and almost slapstick at times. But and I write a book every 6 months. I write one in one series, then the next, and I go back and forth. And I like that a lot because it keeps me from getting stale and repetitious. 2 different styles of writing, but they're both similar. I mean, they're still fiction. I mean, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was very interesting.
Thank you.
I have some questions for you, but I'll hold off on those until we get through everyone else. Karen Dionne took the world and me by storm with The Marsh King's Daughter. She hails from north of Detroit and enjoys nature photography. And if you check out her website, her pictures are stunning. In The Wicked Sister, Rachel has spent over a decade in a mental institution blaming herself for her parents' deaths. But when she finds new details as well as information about her only sibling, she has to return home to learn the truth. Karen's snack choices are simple: sharp cheese and red wine. So Karen, tell us about The Wicked Sister.
Yeah, well, first off, yes, thanks for having us all here tonight. This is so fun. And, you know, I was only half joking when I said, even if there was no audience, I would come just to be able to hang out with my friends. Like, I miss that. So, The Wicked Sister is my follow-up book to The Marsh King's Daughter. Both books are set in Michigan's Upper Peninsula wilderness, where I lived for a lot of years. So I draw on a lot of personal experience when it comes to, you know, the flora and fauna of the area. In The Wicked Sister, the main character, Rachel, as Lisa said in the little blurb, the book opens with her in a mental hospital. But her growing up years are also as part of the book, told from the point of view of her mother. So Rachel grows up in a beautiful over-the-top log cabin. It's a hunting lodge. You can hardly even call it a log cabin. There's a copper roof and stained glass windows and Tiffany lamps and Oriental rugs, Navajo blankets, everything. Probably a lot of first edition novels in their library. And so her parents are wildlife biologists. So as she's growing up as a little girl, she develops a real kinship with the natural world and an appreciation for it. Her father studies amphibians on the property and her mother studies black bears. And so Rachel too has a particular bond with black bears as a little girl. And to the point where even when she's an adult, she believes that she can communicate with animals on a deeper, almost a spiritual level. But yeah, as we've said, the book opens with her in a mental hospital, and she's been in the mental hospital for 15 years because by her own choice, because she believes that she's responsible for the terrible shooting accident that took both her parents' lives when she was 11. So I do have a little sample to read of the opening chapter, and this is in Rachel's voice. She says, "Sometimes when I close my eyes, there is a rifle in my hands. My hands are small, my fingers are pudgy. I'm 11 years old. There's nothing special about this particular rifle, nothing to distinguish it from any other Remington, except that this is the rifle that killed my mother. In my vision, I am standing over my mother. The rifle is pointing at her chest. Her mouth is open and her eyes are closed. Her chest is red. My father runs into the front hallway. "Rachel," he screams when he sees me. He drops to his knees, gathers my mother in his arms, looks up at me, his expression an unfamiliar jumble of shock and horror. He rocks my mother for a long time as if she is a baby, as if she is alive. At last he lays her gently on the worn parquet floor and gets slowly to his feet. He takes the rifle from my trembling hands and looks at me with a sorrow greater than I can comprehend and turns the rifle on himself. "Not so," says the golden orb spider from the middle of her web in a corner of my room where the cleaners never sweep. "Your father killed your mother, and then he killed himself." I don't understand why the spider is lying. Spiders normally tell the truth. "How do you know?" I can't resist asking. "She wasn't there when my parents died. I was." The spider regards me solemnly from 8 shiny eyes. "I know," she says. "We all know." Her spiderlings skitter about the edges of the web as insubstantial as dust motes and nod. I want to tell the spider that she is wrong, that I know better than anyone what happened the day my parents died, and I understand the consequences of my childhood crime better than she ever will, because I've been living with them for 15 years. Once you've taken someone's life, it breaks you, shatters you into so many infinitesimal pieces that no one and nothing can put you together again. Ask any drunk driver who killed a pedestrian, any hunter who thought the friend or brother-in-law he shot was a deer, anyone who held a loaded rifle when she was too young to anticipate what was about to happen. My therapists say I'm suffering from complicated grief disorder and promise I'll get better in time. My therapists are wrong. I'm getting worse. I can't sleep, and when I do, I have nightmares. I get frequent headaches and my stomach hurts all the time. I used to think constantly about killing myself until I realized that living in a mental hospital for the rest of my life is the greater punishment. I eat, I sleep, I read, I watch TV, I go outside. I breathe the warm summer air, feel the sun on my skin, listen to the birds chirp and the insects hum, watch the flowers bloom and the leaves turn and the snow fall, and through it all, always, always in the front of my mind and deep in my heart burns this terrible truth. I am the reason my parents will never see, smell, taste, laugh, or love again. My parents are dead because of me. The police ruled my parents' deaths a murder-suicide perpetrated by my father. All the news reports I've been able to find agree. Peter James Cunningham, age 45, murdered his wife, Jennifer Marie Cunningham, age 43, for undetermined reasons, and then turned the rifle on himself. Some speculate that I saw my father shoot my mother, and that's why I ran away. Others that I found my parents' bodies, and this is what sent me over the edge. I would have told them that I was responsible if I had been able to speak. When I came out of my catatonia 3 weeks later, I made sure that everyone who would listen knew what I had done. But to this day, no one believes me, not even the spider. So that's the beginning of the book. And as the book continues, Rachel discovers fairly early on in the next chapter a detail that she has no memory of that day, but it shows that she couldn't have done this thing. And so, yes, she goes back to her childhood home where her aunt and sister are still living to try to figure things out. And bad things happen because that's what I write.
Very interesting. That sounds really cool.
Thank you.
I have.
That sounds like an amazing follow-up to the first book. I can't wait to read it. I haven't read it yet. I do have a comment from Tori Eldridge on Facebook who says, "Hello, my friends. Best wishes for tomorrow's book release, Boyd Morrison, and congratulations on the new books, Karen Dionne, D.P. Lyle, and Allison Brennan."
Oh, very nice. Well, I have a question for Karen. The Wicked Sister deals with psychopathic children. So what got you interested in that topic, and did you meet any children that were so afflicted?
That's a great question. What inspired this was experience of some friends of ours. Many years ago, they adopted 3 siblings. And obviously the kids had issues because they were available for adoption. right? The two younger children did really well in the new environment, but the oldest child, who was around 10 when they adopted him, he was difficult. It was challenging. He behavior problems. He was violent towards his younger brother and sister. So when he was 12, they had to put him in an institution. And, observing that, even now, I think, how heartbreaking. How, as a parent, do you choose between your children? It's like Sophie's Choice, right?
Yeah.
And how do you reach that point? How do you know you've reached that point where you have to send one child away for the sake of the other two? So this is actually the issue that Rachel's mother is dealing with. Obviously, Rachel has a sister, because the book is called The Wicked Sister. And so, this is, like I say, this is the core issue for Jenny, Rachel's mother. And Rachel's half of the story too was inspired by something that I had read. This was an incident. Of course, we know there are all kinds of accidental shootings committed by children and even toddlers. But years ago, I read about a toddler who was behind his mother in the car, strapped into his car seat. He found a loaded handgun in her purse, and he shot and killed her through the seat.
Oh my gosh.
I know, it's horrific, just horrific. But what struck me about it was, I thought, well, at some point that little child is going to grow up. They're going to find out what they did to a child, and so how would that change you? How would that affect you? You go along thinking, oh, I'm a good person, and you find out, no, you killed your mother when you were a child. So, those are the kind of issues that I'm working with Rachel. That's as close as I come to any personal experience. A lot of research, obviously goes into being able to bring that situation to life. But for some reason, I'm drawn to tragedy. But I think of my books as being ultimately uplifting, because the characters overcome the tragedy in their childhood. So,
right, interesting. Yeah. Now, I also found that you, among all the other things you've written, you wrote an adaptation of the TV show The Killing, which I loved. So how did that come about?
Yeah, that came about through my agency. They were looking for a female thriller author to write a tie-in to the show. And I had not even known of the show at that point. This was at the end of season 1. But as soon as I watched the pilot episode, I was like, oh, yes, I would love to write this. So the book is my original story using the characters from the show. And so it was work for hire, television tie-in, but it was a really, really fun experience. So, in order to research that book, I had to watch a lot of television.
Well, that does sound fun.
But yeah, I'm glad to hear you're a fan. I just thought the writing of that show is amazing. If people aren't familiar with it, they can find it all on Netflix. Yeah. Yes.
It was only 4 seasons, I think.
Right.
And I think the last one was kind of short even.
Yeah, it was. And as I was working on the novel, the show was canceled twice and brought back twice. My novel was canceled twice, brought back twice. So, it was an interesting experience.
Right. Okay, let's move on to Boyd. Boyd Morrison has quite an introduction. In Seattle, has worked on the space station for Lockheed, earned patents while working at RCA, designed video games for Microsoft, won on Jeopardy, and, oh yes, is a professional actor. Way to make us all feel like underachievers. Thank you, Boyd. In his latest book with Clive Cussler, Marauder, Captain Juan Carrillo interrupts an attack on a Kuwaiti oil tanker only to find that a billionaire's dying wish has put a biological weapon in the hands of terrorists. Boyd likes to unwind with hard cider and pepperoni pizza with peppers and onions, which I don't have any here to demonstrate with, but I wish I did. So tell us about Marauder.
Marauder is my 6th collaboration with Clive Cussler, who sadly passed away in February of this year. The Oregon Files is the series I write in. He has 4 other series that he collaborates with other authors. The Oregon Files is, I think of it as Mission Impossible on the high seas, because the ship that is called the Oregon on the outside looks like this rusty old tramp steamer that's about to sink. And on the inside, it's actually this high-tech spy ship with all kinds of weapons, and it's crewed by former CIA agents and Navy SEALs, and they take on jobs that the US government can't do themselves. And so they sail around the world getting into all kinds of different adventures. And with Marauder, it's actually going to be my last book in the series. I told Clive before the previous book, which is called Final Option, oh, I didn't hold it up right, that I wanted to go back and do my own books again, work on my solo books. And so we had come up with a really cool idea for Final Option. And when we did, Clive said, well, you've got to do the follow-up because of what we do some pretty intense things in this book. And I said, okay. And then Marauder will be my last book. So fortunately, he got to see the outline for Marauder and really loved the idea. And there's a new ship that we're featuring in the book, and he really loved the design of the ship. So I think he would, I finished the book without him, of course, but I think he would really like how it turned out. So I'll just read a short chapter from towards the beginning. It's not the first chapter, but it's towards the beginning of the book. Abdul Tanjung didn't want to wait on the boat while the others took control of the oil tanker, but he was the newest member of this cell of the terrorist group Indo-Jihad, so he was left to ensure the boat was ready for their escape before security forces arrived. Now that the Dahar had come to a stop, there wasn't much for him to do but keep watch for any crew member who might attempt to escape by climbing down the ladder. Tanjung had fought for the Islamic State in Syria and returned to Indonesia to help install a caliphate in his home country. With his connections in ISIS, it wasn't hard to find like-minded comrades in Jakarta. Their first mission appeared to be a complete success, and a second one planned for Bali would convince their enemies that the influence of the hated Americans was at an end in Southeast Asia. Sinking a Kuwaiti oil tanker headed to the United States and causing a massive environmental catastrophe would strike fear into every government in the region. Encouraged by the oil tanker sinking and the Bali operation, more jihadists would flock to their cause, and they would carry out even more headline-grabbing attacks until these secular regimes were reduced to shambles. Tanjung listened eagerly to the reports coming over the walkie-talkie and cheered at every small victory. "We have all the crew accounted for," said Commander Curson. "Bring them to the mess hall. Tanjung, what is your status?" "Maintaining my position beside the ship. No activity here." "Good. We will lock the crew in the mess hall while we plant the bombs. When we're done, we'll bring them down to you." "Yes, sir." They had 3 bombs, which had to be placed carefully to sink a ship of this size, and they had to be detonated before the Coast Guard or Defense Forces could get there, presuming the Dahar had used the SSAS. Based on what they knew of response times from previous hijackings in the area, they had an hour to evacuate the ship and make a dash back to their shore base. With the crew in custody, Tanjung could relax. He set down his assault rifle and sat on the deck to enjoy a well-deserved bag of clip-ons that his mother had made for him and his comrades. The sugary snack was covered in coconut shavings, and he brushed his fingers on his pants as he watched a cargo ship in the distance behind them. Tanjung thought his eyes must be playing tricks on him because it appeared that the large freighter was racing toward them at an amazing speed. Every time he looked away and then back at the ship, it seemed closer. He shrugged. It didn't really matter. A ship that size couldn't be doing more than 20 kilometers per hour. They would be long gone with the hostages before it got anywhere close to them. Not that a civilian cargo ship could threaten them anyway. When he was done with his snack, he crumpled up the bag and tossed it overboard. That's when his eye was drawn to something strange roiling the water. He rose and went to the gunwale. The water bubbled from something rising up, almost as if a sea monster were emerging from the depths. A long, flat object appeared next to his boat, barely breaking the surface. It could have been a wayward piece of flotsam tossed overboard from one of the many cargo ships that plied the strait. Tanjung noticed that it wasn't entirely flat. Toward one end was a short cupola with windows. He was startled to see two eyes inside staring back at him. He was an older man with ruddy cheeks and a fringe of reddish hair around a bald head. For a moment, Tanjung wondered if someone had drugged his clip-ons, but his trance was shattered when a hatch flew open from the back of what he now understood to be a submersible that had come out of nowhere. A figure dressed in black and wearing a balaclava rose out of the opening like a demon and pointed a gun at him. Tanjung turned to lunge for his assault rifle, but it was far too late. He heard a hiss and felt a needle plunge into his back. He tried to reach the dart to pull it out, but within a second, his knees buckled and he collapsed to the deck. He didn't lose consciousness, but his head was fuzzy and his mouth felt as though it were coated in cotton. The man clad in black jumped over the gunwale and loomed over him like a giant. He bent down, plucked the dart out of Tanjung's back, and turned him over. The intruder tossed the assault rifle overboard before dropping to his knees, and Tanjung could see sharp blue eyes watching him intently. The man said something in English, which Tanjung didn't understand. "No speak English," Tanjung heard himself reply, almost as if it came from someone else. The man switched to Arabic, a dialect Tanjung recognized as Saudi. "How many of you are there on the Dahar?" Tanjung tried to resist answering, but he felt compelled to tell what he knew. 7. "Don't bother trying to fight it," the intruder said. "The drug you were injected with not only disables you, but it also acts as kind of truce serum. Believe me, I've tried it myself. Now, what is your objective?" "Bombs. 3 of them. We're going to sink the tanker." "And the crew? Are they still alive?" "Yes, in the mess hall." "Good. You're going to tell me where all the bombs are being planted." The man yanked off his balaclava to reveal a blonde crew cut and a handsome tan face. He had intense, intelligent eyes and an innate authority about him that exuded confidence. Even in his hazy mental state, Tanjung was surprised to see the man uncover himself. "Who are you?" Tanjung asked, slurring the words as he spoke. For some reason, he felt the need to add, "I am Tanjung." "My name is Juan Cabrillo, and I am about to put your terrorist friends out of business. Not that it really matters whether I tell you." Cabrillo smiled like he was enjoying telling a secret he'd been keeping. "You see, the drug coursing through your veins also erases your memory. When you come to in about 4 hours with a splitting headache, you won't remember a thing about me." And then it gets worse.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. I'd love to know what that drug is. I'd love to use that in a few of my
Fentanyl.
talks.
But you can see it's very Mission Impossible-esque.
Yeah.
And who doesn't love Mission Impossible?
I love it.
So I had a question. Is the Oregon named the Oregon because of the New York Maritime Training Ship or because you live in Oregon?
It is named well, the series, I started writing the series on book number 10. And so there were 9 books before me, and Clive started the series with another author. And so, yes, you are exactly correct. It's named after the Maritime University Training Ship, Oregon. And that was the same university that gave Clive a doctorate, not an honorary doctorate, a real doctorate based on all of his NUMA shipwreck work that he had done. He, through his organization and he himself, I think found over 50 shipwrecks in his life, including the Confederate submarine Hunley, which was the first submarine, the Civil War submarine. It was the first submarine that actually was able to attack a ship in battle. And it sank in Charleston Harbor, and Clive found it, and now it's in a museum in Charleston.
That is so cool.
Yeah,
Clive
was just as larger than life as the characters he wrote about.
Yes,
Well,
he was.
I know that from talking to you and talking to Robin Purcell, that Clive is pretty hands-on with with working with you as you're doing the books. What was it like doing this last one on your own? Or
Yeah, I think, the way we worked was I would come up with an outline and he would approve it or change it depending on what he thought. And then before that, we would brainstorm the general idea of the book together. And then once we had the outline, I would go and write 100 pages and based on that and send them to him, and he would revise it and send it back to me. And then we would just keep going like that until the book was done. Thankfully, I had done 5 books with him prior to this. So I really, I think, had a good sense of what he, by now, what he would, pay attention to in the book and what he would change. And so he actually was able to give me feedback on the first 100 or so pages of the book before he died. And then I completed the rest of the book without him. I mean, it was very sad not to be able, a couple of weeks after he died was when I was supposed to go actually take a picture with him for the book jacket. And it obviously didn't happen, but I think it would be happy with how the book turned out.
I'm sure he would. Okay, well, our fourth author is Allison Brennan. Hails from California and has served as a consultant to their legislature, raised 5 children, and writes 3 books a year. Again, thank you for making us all feel like underachievers. And I'm going to reveal a secret she doesn't know I know. She's a Marvel DC Universe fan. In her newest release, Cold as Ice, a very young criminal that FBI agent Lucy Kincaid has put away is released on her 18th birthday and promptly sets about destroying everyone in Lucy's life one by one. And like me, Lucy likes anything chocolate. So if you go to our website, there's a great recipe there for chocolate mousse. So Allison, tell us about Cold as Ice.
First, I realized I got to update my webpage because I moved to Arizona last year.
Oh, okay.
So
that's okay.
Yeah. So and I know Boyd always blows me away with his background. I mean, he has this incredible background, and and then my son is one of those smart people like Boyd is, because he's getting a math and computer science double major, and he's like taking, well, he calls it calculus 4, but apparently it's called something else like linear algebra or invisible math or something like that. I don't know what it is, but he got a 97 on his test, and I'm like going, how do you do that? I mean, I can add and subtract just fine, but yeah.
Yes, yeah, me too.
So I'm like, when he's graduating in 3 years, so it's like, yay him. But then I tell him about Boyd. I said, like, now you got to go become a rocket scientist.
Yeah.
He just wants to design video games. Anyway, okay. So Lucy Kincaid. I did have my book here, and I did find like a very, very, very short scene to read.
Okay, great.
I don't like to read from my books. Let's see, Lucy. This is the 17th book in the Lucy Kincaid series, and sort of like Doug was talking about earlier, I like to write in 2 series because it helps to go back and forth. Then you feel like you're so excited to get back to the other series in the other book. And so you're excited about the book, and hopefully that'll come out in the writing. And then by the end of the book, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't stand these characters. Oh, but I can stand other characters. This is so great. And it just keeps both series going, what I hope will be, 2 strong series because of it. And this one, this was one of those books that I had no idea how it was going to end. And I'm writing it, and Sean is arrested for murder. So Sean's arrested for murder. His brother Kane, who's a mercenary, he basically rescues hostages in Mexico and Central America. He disappears. And he's disappeared after he rescued a bunch of, he basically stopped a human trafficking ring, and then he went after one of the guys and just disappears. Lucy's partner is arrested for possession of cocaine. He's an FBI agent. And so, well, he's not arrested, he's detained. He says it's not his, it was found in his truck. So he's put on leave, and something else happens. I can't remember. Oh yeah, and then her best friend, who's a DEA agent, is kidnapped. Well, all before this, some teenage psychopath was released. She was in basically juvenile hall for 2 years, and she gets released, and she's supposed to be back in California, which is where she is from. But nobody can find her now. But can an 18-year-old psychopath actually do this? Or is her father, who is in prison, the one behind all of this? Or somebody else? So I had so much fun writing this, and I got all my characters into all these amazing situations, and I go, I have no idea how I'm gonna get them out. Unlike Boyd, I do not plot, I do not outline, I cannot stand when my editor asks me for a synopsis. It's usually, I just turned one in. It was 4 pages of basically setup. This is kind of the setup of the story that's all gonna go in the first chapter. And then 1 page of what I think is gonna happen after that. So yeah, that's kind of how it is. But so Lucy, so I kind of picked a brief scene, and I gotta take off my glasses so I can read it. I can't see you with my glasses, but then I can't read with them, so it's really weird. So this is basically, Sean is arrested. Well, there's a prologue, and I know people hate prologues, although I love them. I'll skip that, but I'll skip his arrest, which is really fun. But this is a very short scene as he is in the back of a squad car. They live in San Antonio. He was arrested in San Antonio at his house. And this is him, the murder took place in Houston. So San Antonio police are, out of a courtesy, are driving him to Houston. And speaking of Robin, somebody mentioned Robin Purcell. I know I go off on tangents all the time. She helped me with this book so much because I wanted to make sure that I got the arrest right. Because, there was not any hard physical evidence against him, but he was spotted on the security camera at the same time about the same time that she was killed. And so she read the first chapter for me, and I'm forever grateful to her. So if she's listening, she knows that. Anyway, okay, so this is Sean thinking about why he's basically been arrested. Lucy must know by now that he'd been arrested. Sean hated that he couldn't be the one to tell her. What had they done? Sent a couple cops to FBI headquarters? Called her down to the station? Were they questioning her? They would, just to get his alibi. She would have to answer. She was a sworn agent, right? Did they have spousal immunity? He didn't know the rules on that, just vague information. Just as a hint, I don't know the rules on that. That's why he only has vague information. Anyway, okay. You're innocent. Why are you thinking this way? Because he'd been in the back of a police car for the last hour driving across Texas to be booked and charged with a crime he didn't commit. He was going to lose it before they arrived, and he had to keep it under control. And this arrest was going to stop him from finding his brother. Jack told him to stay put, that he'd call if he needed him, but Sean planned to be ready to leave on a moment's notice. Kane was missing. Sean didn't want to lose another brother. He planned to fly down to Hidalgo to be closer to Mexico if Jack needed his help. Now they were on their own. Of course, Jack, Kane, and their team were more than capable of handling the situation south of the border. They'd been mercenaries half of Sean's life. But Kane wasn't the young man he used to be, and Siobhan was also down there. The least he could do was help protect the convent and his sister-in-law. Was Kane's disappearance and his arrest connected? That seemed extraordinary, but Sean couldn't rule anything out. He closed his eyes, tried to slow his heart rate. He needed to think, figure out what was going on and how to get out of this mess. Lucy probably had 100 questions, not the least of which was why he'd gone to Houston to see Mona Hill in the first place. He should have told her because it affected her. It affected both their families. But on Monday night, he was still figuring out what to do about the information Mona gave him. He told her what to do. She told him to go to hell, and they'd argued. She'd seen the light, then he left. He certainly hadn't killed her over their disagreement. He needed her as much as she needed him, and her death was more than an inconvenience. But he couldn't tell the cops any of this. If he admitted some things, not lying because they'd catch him in a lie, but simply not giving them the background, they would be suspicious. His meeting with Mona Hill made no sense out of context. He needed information, but the cops that were driving wouldn't talk. And if they did, they didn't know anything important. This was a Houston case. These were SAPD cops. Damn it, Mona, what happened to you after I left Monday night? Sean hadn't wanted to talk to Mona Hill at all, and he certainly didn't want to fly to Houston to talk to her in person, but she'd given him no real choice. She called him Saturday morning. He ignored her. Jesse had a soccer game, then he and Lucy had a rare night alone because Jesse had spent the night at a friend. He ignored Mona on Sunday the multiple times she called. Then Monday morning she called again, and Sean answered, irritated. What do you want, Mona, Odette, or whatever name you're calling yourself these days? Don't you dare turn your back on me, Sean Rogan. You are no saint. And if you don't think I don't have a few tricks up my sleeve, don't test me. Do not threaten me, he said. I don't want to. I don't want anything to do with you, but you made this mess and I need you to fix it. Explain. I have to see you as soon as possible. There was fear in her voice, and her fear won his curiosity because Mona Hill wasn't a woman who feared much. I need more. Tobias. He's dead. Someone from his operation is fucking with me and I don't know exactly who it is. Damn it, Rogan. Do you think I wanted to call you? Do you think I want to be in your debt? You're a blue-eyed devil, but only a devil can stop these demons. So, see, I knew there was going to be a bad word. I was trying to skim for a section that didn't have a bad word. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. That's not a problem. We're thriller writers. We're used to that. So.
I have to say, for people who don't like to read, you all read very well.
Very well. Yes. That is so true.
I read fast, so.
That's cool, though.
So does anyone have any questions?
Yes, 17 books in one series? How do you do that?
They pay me to.
I
No,
want to
that
know
is
how you
important.
do 3 books in 1 year.
Well, right now,
Yeah,
it's really kind of like 5 books every 2 years. So it's like 2.5 books a year.
Oh, well, that's easy.
Oh, well, yeah, that's,
That changes everything.
nothing.
I thought it was hard.
Well, I write full time. I mean, this is my job. So, you know, I used to work in the California legislature and I quit in 2005 after I sold my first book and I never went back. So I write full time, and if I don't write, I don't get paid. And if I don't get paid, we don't pay the mortgage, and therefore, so it's really a huge incentive. But I love it. I mean, I'm kind of flip about it, but I feel extremely blessed that I get to do what I love to do and make a living doing it. So, so Lucy with 17 books, what was really, I didn't expect to get to 17 books. I wrote the first 3 books and I kind of designed them as a trilogy so that they would have like an overarching character growth, but each book stands on its own with its own mystery. And then I changed publishers, and I wasn't expecting to write any more Lucy's when I changed publishers, but they said they really liked the books and they wanted me to do more. So I kind of came up with another 3-book story arc and sold 3 books. And that was essentially Lucy going through Quantico. And then they wanted more, so then I came up with that. So I kind of like did everything is kind of based on like a kind of a 3-book story arc. Just because, or if they only bought 2 books, then it's kind of a 2-book story arc, you know, because you never know. You don't quite know what's going to happen with your series. So you don't want to ever leave on I had 1 series canceled, and I never want to ever leave on my readers unsatisfied, just because you never know what's going to happen. So what I, get a 3-book contract, I said, okay, if the series ends at the end of this 3rd book, I'm going to be happy. And if I get more, great, I'll write more books, and that make me happy. And I enjoy Lucy and Sean. They're a lot of fun. I've done like 4 or 5 novellas with them, and my novellas tend to be really long, like 35,000, 40,000 words. And they're kind of fun too. And they teach me how to, I'm very wordy, as you can tell. So they teach me how to be a lot tighter in my writing, because you have to tell a complete story in 35,000 words.
And do you have a daily word count, or do you just say, I'm going to work for 5 or 8 hours or whatever?
It's time, because I do a lot of obviously editing and deleting and stuff. So I don't want to say, I have to get 2,000 words done a day or 5,000 words done a day. I say, I need to put in the time. And as long as I'm putting in the time, that book's going to be done on deadline. So usually I would love to say I write 8 hours a day, but I procrastinate a lot. I have,
don't we all?
I play video games. It's a little better now that my son's in college, because I don't play the games he plays. I play the ones that I can understand. So I don't, which are not the ones you play online. They're not like the multiplayer games. Like we'll sit there and play Lego Star Wars, and we could play that all night long because it's one of my favorite games. And, he's not here, so it's not as much fun to play. I do procrastinate. I'll sit down, I'll read a book, and all of a sudden 4 hours will pass. I probably write a good 4 hours a day. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I'd like to say 8 hours, but that's a lie.
Mm.
How about everyone else? And do you guys write 8 hours a day? Karen?
No, I have absolutely no schedule. I
Yeah.
write when I feel like it, and I don't write when I don't feel like it. It's as simple as that. And
No,
it
I
could be an
couldn't do
hour,
that.
it could be 5 hours.
Yeah.
Who knows?
And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
work though too, right?
Yeah, well, I go to the office 2 days a week, but that's no big deal. I have lots of time to write if I want to. It's just I just refuse to make this a job. You know, I had a job for 50 years. I still got a job. I don't want another job. This is supposed to be fun. So I write when I feel like it. When I don't feel like it, I don't. I don't do deadlines. I don't sign contracts that have a deadline. You'll get the next book when it's done. Now, fortunately, when I start something, I got to finish it. You know, I can't let it hang out there on the horizon. It drives me
Yeah.
crazy. That's that OCD stuff, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, I call
Yeah.
myself an obsessive compulsive perfectionist. So, and I think that's probably typical of most writers, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I
write
do.
every day, but I start early. So my best writing time is like between 6 and noon. If I push
Mhm.
myself
Me
and
too.
still get work done, I can make some progress in the afternoon, but not nearly
Right.
that those first hours are the ones where I really fly.
Same way.
Yeah, me too. I do word count and I make myself insane with it. And I have to tell myself, it doesn't matter. It's not like anyone's making, it doesn't, if you don't do 2,000 words today, you only do 1,800, it doesn't matter, but I don't care. I got to do it
Well,
anyway.
I just revised a book and sent it to my editor on Friday, and it was due Friday, and so I got some notes and I was doing the entire revision. So I started it on Sunday, the revision, and the book was 98,000 words. I revised the entire book, and when I sent it to her, it was 119,000 words.
Yeah.
So I guess I could say that in 5 days I wrote 20,000 words.
20,000 words in 5.
Wow.
And
So-
revise the book.
But it was a revision, and I tend to do revisions a lot faster than the first draft, because the first draft I'll write a chapter and the next day I'll rewrite that whole chapter. So one day I might have 3,000 words written. The next day I might have negative 300, but that chapter that I rewrote is now good, or at
Right.
least good enough
Right.
until I get to the revision stage. And
Mhm.
so I kind of do that process. I learned that from Jim Rollins. He said that he does 10 pages a day, and then that night he edits them, and then the next day he makes those changes, and then he writes 10 more pages. And he does that, I guess, 5 days a week. I don't know how many days he writes. So I do write 7 days a week. So, but so I like that idea. So I've kind of done that, except I can't edit at night because with kids, I mean, he has dogs.
Yeah.
He takes care of his dogs. He doesn't have kids, but with the kids, I have to feed them, or they and then do kid stuff. And then my kids we're all in sports. I only have 2 home. I have 5 total, but only 2 of them are left at the nest.
Mm.
Boyd, I have a question. What is your book that you want to write now that you're
Oh, I was wanting to know that too.
going
Yes.
back to writing your own? What
Well,
are you working on?
I'm actually almost done with my next book. It's very different than anything I've done before. It's a historical adventure
Mhm.
that takes place in the Middle Ages. And
Oh, wow.
my sister is the head curator of medieval manuscripts at the Getty Museum. And so we are doing this story together. She's kind of my
Cool.
historical ringer. Because I don't know much about the Middle Ages, so I just write in, something, and then I say Middle Ages stuff now, and then I send it to her, and she puts it in.
Cool.
Yeah, I was too young then to remember much of
Still
it.
a thriller? Or is it
Yeah, it's I would say it's kind of the tone of like Robin Hood, so it's an adventure thriller.
Cool.
Hmm.
Man,
So,
that's got to be a great resource having.
yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're
I
gonna
would
write
never
something
have
in
even
the time.
considered writing it without her. I mean, she's probably one of the foremost authorities on the Middle Ages in the world. So
Now I want to have a question. Because she's your sister and you grew up together, is it easier to write with her than it was, let's say, with Clive? go back to the beginning with Clive?
Good question.
Yeah, it's very different because, I mean, she is a writer herself. She's written a number of nonfiction books for shows that she's done at the Getty and other books, but she's not a fiction writer. And so we plot the whole story together, and then I actually do the writing, and then I send it to her to fix all my anachronisms and terminology and all of that. And so it's a very different process than working with Clive. And a lot of people ask, so can you work with your sister? And it's great. I mean, we have a ball planning, the plot of the book. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm writing it on spec, so we'll see what happens with it, but we're having a lot of fun.
It does sound fun, and I think when a writer is having fun with a book, really special things can happen. So we'll cross our fingers for you.
Thank you.
Ivana Kershey wanted to know the same thing, that they want to know what your next project is. So what's yours, Karen?
Oh, okay. So I'm working on a third novel that's set in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And in The Marsh King's Daughter, I use the wetlands, the marsh, the swamp as a setting. In The Wicked Sister, I use the forest. This book, I'm using Lake Superior. Because for those who aren't familiar with Michigan, 4 of the 5 Great Lakes border Michigan. Michigan has like 3,000 miles of coastline. It's crazy. And the Lake Superior is, the biggest, it's the coldest, it's the deepest, it's the wildest. The section of shoreline where my story takes place is known as the graveyard of the Great Lakes because so many ships have gone down there, including the Edmund Fitzgerald. So that might give a little hint as to some of the story events, but the book centers on a relationship between a grandmother and a granddaughter who both are not necessarily who they claim to be. So that's all I'll say about that. I got to go there for research recently. My husband and I bought a travel trailer, a self-contained travel trailer, and we went to a rustic campground on the shore of Lake Michigan, not in this beautiful weather, but it was like cold 30s and 40s. And one morning we woke up to snow, but it was so beautiful, because it was a campground without electricity and running water, but we had everything with us in the trailer. And it was, and no cell service. That was interesting.
What is the name of the,
and I got to call it a business trip.
what is the national park up there? Nevada Bar wrote a book and set it in that national park where.
There's Hiawatha National Forest. The Upper Peninsula is like 75% state or national forest. So, it's a big place. Yeah. And it was so beautiful. So my challenge will be to convey the power of the Great Lake. Boyd, I might tap you a little bit.
Sure. Happy to help.
Yeah.
And how about you, Doug?
Well, I have the next Jake book, which will be number 5 done, edited, good to go, in the hopper. It'll be out in the fall. And interestingly, I was about 20,000 words into that when the pandemic hit, and we had our office closed for 3 weeks. The golf courses were closed. The bars and restaurants were closed. We were all in the basement. So in 3 weeks, I finished the first draft because what else was I going to do? So I'm talking about writing 8 hours a day. It was at least that because I was bored to death. And so I finished the book. And usually for me, editing's very quick. Usually I have very little edits. And I just fly back through the edits. I sent it off to Bob and Pat at Ocean View, and they said, we love this. We're good to go. And now I'm working on the next Kane Harper book, and I'm about 20,000 words into it. So when the pandemic strikes again, I can finish it in 3 weeks, but that's not going to happen. This is college football season, so my writing slows down during college football season.
So Jenny Milchman is asked, says, I love the settings in your work, Karen. All of you write so differently and really carve out subgenres and thrillers, so props for that. Boyd is getting out of one comfort zone. Do others ever consider writing something completely different? So
I can comment on that. So that's what happened with me when I wrote The Marsh King's Daughter. I had been writing environmental thrillers similar to what Michael Crichton writes, set in the present day with a heavy dose of science. And I got the idea for The Marsh King's Daughter when I woke up in the night with the first sentences in my head. And that's what led me down the path of psychological suspense. So I didn't sit down and deliberately say, oh, I'm going to change what I'm writing. It just sort of happened because I was intrigued by the story and I wanted to pursue it. But at the same time, in order to tell the story of The Marsh King's Daughter, I really had to up my game. I tried a lot of writing techniques that I had never used before, like telling a story in a dual timeline and directly addressing the reader. And there's a ton of flashbacks and there's tense shifts, and it follows the fairy tale The Marsh King's Daughter by Hans Christian Andersen. So how was I going to incorporate the fairy tale in? So I like to tell this story because I was so far outside of my comfort zone when I wrote that first chapter. I didn't even know if it was working. And I sent it to my agent, and of course he loved it. He told me very much later that the chapter was so good, he did not think I had written it. Which that's okay, because he's been my agent for like 21 years, we're like an old married couple in that regard. So, but it's true, so it was so interesting to me. And I do preach this when I talk to writers. If you're not happy with where you are in your career, change it up, try something different. Just because you started writing one kind of book doesn't mean that's what you're especially good at. So try something different and see what happens.
I agree. For me, it was the Jake Longley thing. I'd always wanted to write comedy because, I read Tim Mulaney and Carl Hyas and Paul Levin. I love all that stuff, and I always wanted to write comedy. And I always said, well, if those idiots can do it, I ought to be able to do it, But it changed a lot of things because all the nonfiction books and my first 8 novels, I outlined them. And I would outline. It wouldn't be a great outline, but it would be an outline. And I found that halfway through it ended up getting changed anyway. So it kind of never was really an outline. It was just a bunch of suggestions. So when I came up with the like stop signs in Italy, when I decided on the Jake thing, and I was kind of creating this character in my head, and I had one scene in mind, and that's it. It's the opening scene for Deep Six, the first book. And I said, well, don't fret over this. Don't worry about what this story's going to be about. You got an idea for a scene that's pretty cool. You got a character that sounds pretty cool. You don't really know them yet. Just sit down and start writing and shut up. So I started writing, and then the next scene appeared, and the next scene appeared, and the book basically wrote itself. And from right there, not only did I start writing comedy, I quit outlining, and I don't outline at all now. I have an idea for major scenes, kinda, and I kind of know what the next 3 or 4 scenes in a row are going to be, because I'm kind of thinking how to fit that part. But what happens after that is real foggy. So I just start writing now. I don't worry about where it's going to go. I don't worry about if it can be fixed, because for some reason, I think if you do that and get out of the way, a story organically opens. It just goes. I mean, I hate that word organic because it implies something. But I think a story just goes where a story's going to go if you just let it go there. And sometimes you have to move things around a little, but I find it, and I think I write faster that way, because I would fret over an outline for 2 months. And by that time, I'm bored with the story.
Yeah.
And so writing becomes work. But if you don't know what's going to happen next, you sit down and say, okay, what's going to happen today? And I like that. So I kind of outline in my head, and I do use Scrivener, which allows you to create 3 or 4 scenes ahead of time. Actually, you can do the whole thing. I don't do that. Scrivener is a great writing program. It's the best $40 you'll ever spend. It organizes your writing. But anyway, I don't outline anymore. And I think that change to comedy and to outline and to not outlining was something I never would have thought of doing, 10 years ago. But so I agree. And I think what Jenny asked is a great question. Step outside, do something different. Make it fun.
That's a cool experience. Yeah.
Well, nobody's going to want to hear me. I did try writing something new, and it nearly killed my career. So I probably not.
Well, not anytime soon. Everybody's different.
Well, I wrote 3 supernatural thrillers, and I don't think my readers like anything out there. So I still love those books. They were so much fun to write. They were crime thrillers, but there were demons too. So
Right.
demons and witches, dark magic, and it was
Yeah.
it was a lot of fun to do, but those books completely tanked. So it's
Oh,
probably gonna,
that's not fair.
it would probably have to, but it was after that that I came up with Lucy Kincaid. So that was at least, Lucy came after that. So yeah, so I was lucky I was able to save my career, but I probably won't do that again. I think though, sometimes Karen made a really, really, really good point. Sorry, Karen, I'm just like, my mind's, I was looking at Boyd and I was saying, that's not his name. I was on the screen, you know, because I could see everybody there. Karen made a really good point. Sometimes she started writing kind of more scientific thrillers, or, you know, that's probably what you would probably call them, because my Crichton's very scientific, very detailed like that. And she kind of segued into psychological thrillers. I think that when you find your voice, or your genre, you can change it up, because there's so many, the thriller world is so rich and there's so many things that you could do with it, that you don't have to, like my first 12 books were romantic suspense. It was really hard to get out of that. Barnes and Noble only just now, I have 40 books published, only just now are taking me out of romance. Even though there's very, very little sex, no on-page sex in the Lucy Kincaid series, they put them all in romance.
Wow.
But so finally, I think because my new series, Mira's done, they're really packaged in as straight up thrillers. I think they're finally going to move me after 40 bucks. But I do think that you can change things up, and you can write a psychological thriller, a domestic suspense. J.T. Allison is a perfect example of that. You know, she wrote her great police procedurals. Love those books. And now she's really writing that kind of darker domestic suspense without, she doesn't have a lot of gore in her books anymore. You know, so you can do it, and you can kind of reinvent yourself. And I think her books now are doing better than they were, even though I love the Taylor Jackson series. I think she's doing better. She's found her niche.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of authors that have moved out of romance. I mean, Tess Gerritsen, Lisa Gardner, Janet Ivanovich.
Right. Tammy Hogue
decided to try something bigger, and it worked okay for those authors.
Yeah, well, Lisa Gardner is my idol.
Mine too.
I have to say though, when I switched from writing mystery by my Birdwatcher mysteries, which are cozy-ish. I mean, they're cozies, but they're a little edgier. But they and wrote the spy thriller, my first spy thriller, Dark Waters. I actually was told by someone who was working on the Bouchercon programming and who is a thriller critic that once a traditional writer, always a traditional writer. That's how this business works. And it was an uphill battle to break out of that.
Oh, I
What do you
believe it.
mean a traditional writer? What does that mean?
Like a traditional mystery writer and then writing this spy thriller. It's like once you're niched, you're niched. You just don't switch. You can't just switch.
It is hard. It is hard. That's why Barnes
because
and Noble moved me.
Yeah, I just published my Dark Waters, which was an espionage thriller, and that was coming out the day Bouchercon started in 2015. And they put me on a cozy panel called Big Small Cities, Big Problems or something. And I mean, the book is set in Tel Aviv and it's a spy thriller. I was like, wait, this panel doesn't work for me. He said, well, too bad. Once you're that, you're that. So it was a challenge. So
yeah. Well, I can understand, like, if you've developed a readership and then you change, you know, it might be hard to bring your readers along with you. In my case, my early books didn't do well enough to develop a readership, so that's not a problem.
I don't know that mine is.
It left you lots of freedom.
Right.
I'll report back in whenever this book comes out and tell you how it moving to something. I mean, you know, it kind of has the same fast-paced adventure of any of my other books. It's just the setting is different. The setting is 600 years ago instead of today.
And do you have other books in mind that would be similar to this one then?
Well, I mean, my sister and I have talked about doing this as a series if there was interest, but that's way down the line. We're just trying to finish this one and then see what happens.
Sounds so cool. Sounds very fun.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
If nothing else.
Yep.
Well, let us know when it comes out.
Yeah, I'll let you
Yeah.
know. 2023.
Yeah. Yeah.
2023. That's so,
Well, I hate to do it, but we're at 17 past the hour, so we should probably wrap it up for the night. This has been so much fun.
mhm.
Thank you
Very
all
much.
for joining us. This has really been a great session.
Thank you, Lisa, for having
Thank you for having us. Yes.
Yeah,
had a lot of
thanks for
fun.
doing this.
Oh, well, I'm just the MC. I'm just
You're the most
fulfilling a
important one.
role. Chris handles all the tech stuff and had the idea originally to even do these.
Well, thank you all
Well,
really for
It's a
inviting
great
us,
idea.
having
Yeah.
us, and
Yeah.
you know, it was almost as good as talking to you guys at a cocktail party at
Yes.
Thriller Fest. You know,
Yeah, it makes me realize how much I missed, writers conferences this year.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Before we
Yes.
go, Allison, you and I should give a little plug for Winter Thrills and the masterclass because we're both teaching, right, this year?
Yeah, I think they wrote me into that.
Yeah, I'm
I
doing
actually
it
have,
too.
Yeah.
I haven't opened my email about what I agreed to, so.
Well, I don't have the information in front of me, but I know it's in January, and you know it's the same masterclass format as at Thriller Fest. Doug, you've done that too, and Chris, you've taught as well.
Mhm.
So you know it's individual feedback on your manuscript in a small group setting, and
Mhm.
I did it last summer by Zoom, and it worked really well. So yeah,
Okay.
just if there's aspiring writers out there, check out Winter Thrills at I think it's at the Thriller Fest website.
Yeah, I think it's all posted up there. I've
Yeah.
seen the little graphics and stuff, so.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to be participating in Pitch Fest.
Uh-huh.
Kim asked me to, so that's going to be part of it. And
Yeah.
so looking forward to it.
Yep. So that's one thing, you know, when you have conferences in person, you can't have 2 a year, but you know, we can do that because we're online.
Yeah,
Exactly.
True.
that is one advantage.
So when's the next in-person thing you're looking toward? Thriller Fest next year in July? You think we'll be able to be there?
I'd say it's 50-50 right now. I think BoucherCon in New Orleans next September or October, I think, is more likely.
If
But
they
Doug,
have,
should we all line up for the shot? You're the medical expert in this room.
Who knows? Who knows? Nobody knows what's going to happen, but you know, don't even get me started. It's total overkill in the first place. It's the freaking flu, for Christ's sakes. But we've been dealing with these things for 1,000 years. You're a gazelle, you got to cross the river. You know, there's alligators, you know, there's leopards, but you still got to cross the damn river. So go cross the river. I'm very
Ooh.
fatalistic, and every practicing physician that I know, practicing physician, not research physician, says
Mhm.
exactly the same thing. Because we get vomit in our shoes, we don't write grant proposals like Fauci and do research and have no contact with the real world. This is not as bad as you think, not even close.
Mm.
The problem is the denominator. If they say there's 20 million people that have it, 200 million people have it. They haven't been tested. I haven't been tested, and I wouldn't get tested
Mhm.
because I'd have to distance. I couldn't go to the office and see my patients. Then we wear masks, we wash our hands, we do all the stuff that we do. That's fine. That's all you can do. But go on with life. Jesus Christ. This is enough. It's enough. A good crowd shouldn't get together. You shouldn't be sitting in a bar with 500 people, you know, drinking and yelling at each other and all that. Common sense. Goodness gracious. And that's what'll happen now.
Mm.
I think by July, everything will be kind of quieted down.
Mhm.
And remember, testing doesn't tell you anything. It tells you if you're, it tells you if you're positive right now. What about in an hour?
Well, that's
What about
what I
tomorrow?
was thinking. I couldn't figure out why I could go get a test now and then fly to
Why would you?
Hawaii and see my daughter and be sure that I'm not going to
No,
give her COVID.
You can't, because
Yeah.
you could have reached the threshold an hour later. If you literally, that's true. You take the test, an hour later, it could be positive, or 1 day later, it could be positive. Just assume that everybody you have contact with has the virus and that you do too. Just assume that. And then go on with life and use common sense. Duh. You drive a car, you get in an airplane. You know, those are much scarier.
Well,
So,
it's nice to know that you have an opinion.
yeah, no, this has just driven me crazy for 6
I
months
can see that.
because the lunatics have taken over the asylum.
Yeah.
It's a social problem. It's not a medical problem. The medical problem will sort itself out. Wear a mask, wash your hands, don't kiss strangers. I mean, unless they're really good looking, you know.
I know. When you said 500 people in a room at a bar shouting, I'm thinking Thriller Fest. No.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's hard to drink with a mask on, so you know. So writers wouldn't do well.
Killer Nashville is in August.
Yep.
And you know, I was going to be guest of honor this year, and they graciously just transferred all their guests of honor, so I get to be it next year. So I actually get 2 years worth of saying
that's a fun conference.
So that's kind of well. It was wonderful talking to you all, and thank you so much for participating. This has really been fun.
Thank you so much.
Great seeing everybody.
Thanks.